Welcome to the March edition of Straight A Nation. I am here in Manchester with Mr. Keith Howard, who is the Executive Director of Liberty House. Keith, it's a pleasure to meet you.
It's nice to meet you, Felix. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, Keith, I wonder if you could start out letting our viewers know a little bit about you as an individual, your background, and how you came to end up here at Liberty House.
Okay. Now, if I were to tell you that in real time, it would take 56 years. So I will just go over the high and low points. How does that sound?
That's awesome.
Okay. So educationally, grew up in Durham, which is, small college town where education is valued.
Mm-hmm. So you grew up here in New Hampshire?
I grew up here in New Hampshire.
All right. Awesome.
Yes. And then although I have always done very well on standardized tests, I was a horrible, horrible high school student who was much more interested in making people laugh than in getting work done. So that when I graduated from high school, I was a National Merit Scholarship semifinalist for having high PSAT scores, but graduated third from the bottom of my class. So I was the classic underachiever.
So your typical class clown, it would seem, right?
Yes. Although I was probably the most annoying student that most of my teachers had. I was lucky enough that when I went into the Army right out of high school, it gave me a chance to grow up on Uncle Sam's time, which is to say very quickly. And in fact, as executive director here at Liberty House, I refer men and women who live here back to how they felt when they graduated from basic training, because that is a time where people feel as physically strong, as emotionally strong, and yes, even as mentally strong as they ever have in their lives. And so there is a kind of sense memory that exists, so that when I'm talking with somebody who's been living on the street and ask them to think back to that day when they graduated, whether it was the Coast Guard boot camp, Marine boot camp, Army, Air Force, Navy, still that is a shared experience, and there are very few coming-of-age experiences that we have in Western culture.
Right.
And so for those of us who have been in the military, finishing up your basic training is a very important thing. So that really helped me to grow up. When I got out of the Army, I had the GI Bill, and so went and got a bachelor's degree in English at UNH, then worked on a master's in reading, then ended up getting a master's degree in school administration. When I graduated from UNH, took my graduate record exam, another standardized test, and on my first day in graduate school, in the School of Education, studying reading and how people learn to read, my advisor sat me down and said, "Keith, I think you may have made a mistake." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? I'm really interested in this, and my grades are good." He said, "Your GRE scores are just too high for you to be here," which is a sad commentary on education, that a tenured professor would say, "You're too smart to be wanting to teach."
That resonates with me a lot, because when I graduated from high school, I was class valedictorian and went on to the University of Michigan, where I was in the pre-med program.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a whole lot of soul searching, and I decided at some point, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a teacher. That seems to be my natural bent.
Mm-hmm.
And people told me the same thing. They were trying to talk me out of becoming a teacher, because you could be so much more. Imagine
right.
what you could. And in retrospect, after 30 years now in education, I look back and I go, wow, that's just kind of the extreme ultimate insult, right?
Yes.
If you're smart, you shouldn't go into education? What?
Right.
And that if you go into education, oh, well, you settled, and
Right.
you could have been what you could have been.
Right. Instead of
Yeah.
really taking pride and honor in doing an important job well.
So I'm not going to ask you the professor's name,
Okay.
but can you at least tell us where you got your master's
I
degree?
got my master's degree at Riviera College.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So you're a true New Hampshire man.
Yes,
Born in
but
New Hampshire, got your degree from UNH, and then Riviera.
then Riviera,
masters?
yeah. Lived in Germany for 3 years while I was in the Army. Then lived out in Missouri for a couple of years after I got out of the Army. But other than that, yeah, New Hampshire, northern Massachusetts is where I have lived. So, now I do need to let you know that the reason that I'm director of Liberty House, which is an organization that provides housing for formerly homeless veterans and also provides food and clothing for folks who are still on the street, is not because of all the educational background. It's because at the same time that I was doing these other things and went on and ran alternative schools all over the state, I also was a drinker, and my drinking gradually got out of control until I ended up on the streets myself. And so for the past 8 years, been clean and sober, but that's the reason that this is the right place for me. Not educational accomplishments, not professional accomplishments, but because there is identification between guys who are living on the street and me and vice versa.
So when you meet the guys, our veterans who have hit the low point as well, you're able to speak to them from experience.
From experience. And there,
it's not just someone talking down to them, it's someone
Right.
who has been there.
Right. So there is that identification that takes place. There's lots of information in the world. There's not a lot of identification in the world. And simply saying to somebody, you know what, you should stop drinking and then things will probably get better, that's just information. Instead saying, I was where you are, this is what happened to me, and this is where things are at now. There is an identification and a path for somebody to follow in a way that simply saying, you should do this or you should do that. Advice is pretty easy to offer and has very little value. So,
Well, one of the things that I've always said and preached to my children and my students is that at the end of the day, life in general boils down to people
right.
and relationships.
Yep.
And last month we highlighted that in terms of how they should apply for college.
Mm-hmm.
And so having relationships, connecting people with people, and it's not just words, it's not just information, like you
Right.
said, it's being able to make that human connection, and that is the mystery of life, right? That isn't it.
Right.
That is the purpose of life, is our relationships.
Right.
Thank you for giving us a little bit of a background about how you came to Liberty House, but as an organization, when was Liberty House founded?
Liberty House was founded in 2004 by an Air Force veteran named Don Duhamel, who, while driving the streets in Manchester, would see homeless folks. Don was a retired Air Force Master Sergeant, and driving the streets in Manchester, he would see the men that had been his men beside the street. And I don't mean literally folks who had served under him, but the same kinds of folks, veterans who were out of luck, out of hope, and out of doors in the wintertime. And so that lit some kind of fire in his heart. So working with the local VFW, managed to start up Liberty House, which has had more than 200 men and women pass through here in the past 10 years. And then in addition to having 10 people live here at any one time, we also provide food and clothing for anybody, not just veterans, but anybody on the streets who comes and asks, for about, I would say, probably 100 folks a month coming and getting food and or clothing here. Nobody has ever turned away from here. One thing that sets Liberty House apart in terms of food distribution is We keep no records and we ask for no identification, so we don't care about immigration status. Anybody that needs food, we give them food because we have food. Anybody that needs clothing,
it's a human thing to do.
it's the human thing to do. So this is not a church-based organization in any way, but I do like to think about, I believe it's Matthew 25, where Jesus says to his followers, thank you so much for visiting me in prison. Thanks for bringing me clothes. Thanks for feeding me. And they say, what are you talking about, Lord? You were never in prison. You were never hungry. You were never naked. And Jesus says to them, oh, you did all these things for me when you did them for the least of these. And that really is what we're here for, is to provide food to the hungry, clothing to folks who are cold, and then shelter to people who are homeless. We are a clean and sober house. We do regularly monitor through urinalysis and breathalyzer to make sure that we've stayed a clean and sober house. Coming up with what it is that a man or a woman needs to get back into the mainstream, so that we, right now, we have a man who's just completed a 6-month program to become a phlebotomist, somebody who can do an EKG technician, and a personal care attendant, and now is looking for work in the medical field. So he had been on the streets and is now doing that.
And providing medical care.
Right.
That's fantastic. So would you characterize Liberty House as somewhat of a transitional house?
Right, it is.
Not trying to give them a place to just come and stay forever, but rather to get their lives on track and then to become, productive.
Right, and that is the goal, is that the men and women who live here be here 3, maybe 4 months, and then have found work, have saved up some money to be able to pay for an apartment, then that they will move on from here, but that they then will have a moral obligation to Liberty House for what was done for them when they needed the helping hand. So
I was going to ask, do you find that some of the people who have come through Liberty House end up coming back to help out? Or
absolutely, yeah. We have
to maybe even counsel with, or I don't know, not officially, but at least to be one of those people who can identify.
Right, again, it comes back to the identification piece. That is the expectation.
Sort of paying it forward.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this may be a good opportunity for Straight A Nation to have an ongoing relationship with Liberty House, because one of the things that Straight A Nation is looking to do is to provide training and education opportunities for disadvantaged children in particular, but also if there's someone, for example, who needs to get a GED, that you have contact with, maybe we can continue the conversation and see how Straight A Nation can have its education resources available as well.
Right now, I know of a guy who's not living here. He may be moving in at some point soon, but who recognizes that he only reads at a 4th or 5th grade level, and that closes a lot of vocational opportunities. So if you have anybody that would like to, if you have any students that would like to, or anybody in the community that would like to work with a charming young man who needs help with reading, and you need to be sensitive to the fact that we're talking about a grown man, so that Fun with Dick and Jane is not an appropriate reading material. So, but if you do have anybody, that would be a great thing, and they can reach us here at Liberty House.
Or, of course, they could reach at Liberty House, or you could reach through Straight A Nation in terms of making that connection, whatever's most convenient for you.
Yes. I guess, Felix, it is very gratifying to me to have you look out into the community and identify organizations and people that are deserving of some kind of recognition.
Organizations that are making an immediate, direct, positive impact on the community.
Right. And that is, any of us could have done what you're doing, but nobody else did. So thank you for stepping. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you that your particular mental illness is so productive for the rest of us. So Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
It's been a pleasure
Okay.
getting to know you and to getting to know more about Liberty House. So for those of you who would like to know more about Liberty House and the great work that they're doing here, please go to libertyhousenh.org. That's libertyhousenh.org. Find out more how you can support them, and if you have anyone you know who is in need of their services, now you know of another great resource in the community that is having a tremendous impact on people who need that leg up. And we're so proud to be associated with Liberty House and the work that they're doing, and to recognize that they are trying to make a difference in the lives of our veterans who are so near and dear to our hearts, but also the rest of the community in general. They're having a positive impact as well, and providing training and education, which is a very important part of the piece of getting them back on track. So thanks again for tuning in to Straight A Nation. Our business of the month for March 2015 is Liberty House, and again, I've been here with Director Keith Howard. We'll see you next month.